Unchained from the shackles of restraint, humans yearned to prove their mettle, and the Bajoran merchant Keed required their untamed ferocity to survive the onslaught of the Zenloth Imperium. Johnny Brown, battle-scarred from countless campaigns, strode through the spaceport of Bajor Prime. Glares of disdain pierced his form as he pushed past a throng of scornful aliens. To them, humans were little more than barbarians, a reputation Johnny had grown accustomed to, but now the Bajoran's haughty pride hung by a thread. "The Zenloth will tear through our defenses," a Bajoran muttered nearby. "Our fleet can barely hold the line." "Allies? Ha! The humans are our only option, and they're no better than wild animals," another scoffed. A wry grin tugged at Johnny's lips. If only they knew the truth of humanity's strength. But the Bajorans would learn soon enough. Cade, desperate and out of options, had hired Johnny to guard a crucial shipment from pirates, a task that would force the Bajorans to confront their biases or perish. Johnny ducked into a gloomy tavern, spotting Keed hunched over a table in the far corner. As he approached, the weight of the mission settled upon his shoulders. The Bajorans needed this shipment to reach its destination. If Johnny failed, their already strained defenses would crumble, leaving them at the mercy of the Zenloth Imperium's brutal conquest. But Johnny was a human, a savage in their eyes, yet unrivaled in his skills. He'd make damn sure this job got done, no matter the cost. And in doing so, he'd shatter the Bajorans' misjudgments and forge an alliance that would alter the fate of the galaxy itself. Cade drummed his fingers on the table. "I need you to escort a convoy of Bajoran freighters through the Andrazi sector. They're carrying rare crystals that are essential for our energy shields." Johnny leaned forward, his interest piqued. "The Andrazi sector? That's Zenloth territory. I've heard reports of pirate attacks and heavy patrols in that area." "Precisely why I need someone of your caliber," Keed said, his tone tinged with reluctance. "I'm offering a substantial payment, half up front, but I must admit, I have my doubts about a human's ability to handle such a mission." With the deal sealed, Johnny set out to assemble a team. His first stop was a dingy tech shop in the lower levels of the spaceport. There, he found Zix, a Tralaxian hacker known for his skills in infiltration and sabotage. "I'm in," Zix said, his eyes gleaming at the prospect of a challenging job. Next, Johnny sought out Relax, a Quarian pilot with a modified stealth ship. He found her tinkering with her vessel in a secluded hangar bay. "A run through the Andrazi sector?" Relax grinned. "Count me in, Johnny." The final piece of the puzzle was Grom, a hulking Chronoan enforcer. Johnny tracked him down to a seedy fight club on the outskirts of the city. "I've been itching for a good fight," Grom rumbled, cracking his knuckles. "I'm with you, human." With his team assembled, Johnny called a meeting at a rundown bar. The group huddled around a table discussing their strategy. "We need to be quick and decisive if we run into trouble," Johnny said, his voice low. "Pirates, Zenloth patrols, whatever comes our way, we hit them hard and fast." The others nodded in agreement, their expressions grim with determination. But as they prepared to depart, the door to the bar burst open, revealing a group of Bajoran militants led by a fanatical figure named Tyro. "Keed!" Tyro snarled, his eyes blazing with fury. "You dare betray our pride by hiring a human? This is an insult to all Bajorans." Johnny's team sprang to their feet, squaring off against Tyro's militants. Tension crackled in the air as hands hovered over weapons, ready to draw at a moment's notice. But before the situation could escalate further, Johnny stepped forward, his gaze locked on Tyro. "I challenge you to a duel, Bajoran style. Electro-staffs in a circle of honor. Let's settle this like warriors." Tyro's eyes widened in surprise, but a cruel smile twisted his lips. "Very well, human. I accept your challenge. I'll enjoy putting you in your place." Suddenly they clashed in a furious display of skill and strength. Tyro's staff crackled against Johnny's, the air filled with the sizzling of electricity and the grunts of exertion. Johnny parried Tyro's strikes, his movements fluid and precise, honed by years of combat experience. Tyro's face contorted with rage, as he realized the human was a formidable opponent. He pressed his attack, his staff a blur of motion, but Johnny met him blow for blow. The duel stretched on, neither warrior giving ground, their determination matched only by their skill. Johnny and Tyro danced around each other, their electro-staffs clashing in showers of sparks. Tyro's face was a mask of rage as he bore down on the human with all his strength, but Johnny was quick on his feet, ducking and weaving, using his agility to outmaneuver the larger Bajoran. The crowd watched in stunned silence, hardly able to believe what they were seeing. A human holding his own against one of their greatest warriors? It was unthinkable. Tyro swung his staff in a vicious arc, aiming to take Johnny's head off, but Johnny saw it coming, dropping low and sweeping Tyro's legs out from under him. The Bajoran hit the floor with a crash, his staff clattering away. In an instant, Johnny was on him, the crackling tip of his electro-staff hovering inches from Tyro's throat. "Yield," he demanded, his voice hard as steel. For a long moment, Tyro glared up at him, his eyes burning with humiliation and rage. But finally he gritted out, "I yield." Johnny stepped back, allowing Tyro to climb to his feet. The Bajoran dusted himself off, then turned to his followers. "Stand down," he ordered, his voice tight with anger. "The human has won this fight." As the militants lowered their weapons, Tyro turned back to Johnny. "You fight well for a human," he said grudgingly. "Perhaps there is more to your kind than I believed." Johnny just nodded, not trusting himself to speak. He could feel the eyes of the crowd on him, could hear their murmurs of astonishment. Even Kaid was staring at him with a mix of relief and newfound respect. With the confrontation resolved, Johnny and his team wasted no time in departing Bajor Prime. They had a job to do and they couldn't afford any more delays. As they set course for the first waypoint in the Andrazi sector, Johnny called a meeting in the ship's cramped common room. "All right, let's go over the plan one more time," he said, pulling up a holographic display of the convoy's route. Zix, the Trilaxian hacker, leaned forward, his eyes gleaming. "I've been working on boosting the freighter's sensor jammers," he said. "Should help us avoid detection, at least for a while." Raylax, the Quarian pilot, nodded. "And I've fine-tuned the stealth ship's cloaking device. We should be able to scout ahead without being spotted." Johnny studied the display, his brow furrowed. What about potential threats, pirates, Zenloth patrols? Grom, the Chronoan enforcer, cracked his knuckles. "We hit them hard and fast," he rumbled. "Give them a taste of what humans and their allies can do." Johnny nodded, a grim smile tugging at his lips. "Damn straight, but let's hope it doesn't come to that." As they neared the sector border, the ship's sensors suddenly blared a warning. "3 Zenloth patrol ships bearing 270, Ralax reported, her fingers flying over the controls. Johnny leaned forward, his eyes narrowing. "Shit. All right, power down the convoy and hold position. Let's see if they pass us by." The team waited in tense silence as the patrol ships glided past, their scanners sweeping the void. Johnny's heart pounded in his chest as he watched the blips on the sensor display, praying they wouldn't be detected. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, the patrol ships moved on, disappearing into the darkness of space. Johnny let out a breath he hadn't realized he'd been holding. "That was too close," Zix muttered, wiping sweat from his brow. "Agreed," Johnny said grimly. "But we're not out of the woods yet. Let's get this convoy moving again before they come back for another pass." As the freighters powered up their engines, Johnny leaned back in his chair, his mind racing. They had a long way to go, and plenty of dangers still ahead. But with his team at his side, he knew they would find a way through. They had to. The fate of the Bajorans depended on it. The relief was short-lived. An alarm blared through the stealth ship's cockpit. Zix's eyes widened as he scanned the console. "Shit. One of the freighters has a malfunctioning sensor jammer. It's flickering on the Zenloth scopes," he reported, his voice tense. Johnny leaned over Zix's shoulder, watching the Zenloth patrol ships turn, closing in on the exposed freighter. His mind raced, calculating the risks, the options. A plan formed, razor-sharp in its clarity. Relax, decloak the stealth ship and draw their fire. Lure them away from the convoy, Johnny ordered, his tone leaving no room for argument. Zix, coordinate the freighter's defenses from here. Grom, you're with me. We're going to board that freighter and fix the jammer. Grom grinned, a feral glint in his eye. Time to crack some heads. Johnny and Grom suited up, checking their weapons and gear. The airlock hissed open, revealing the cold emptiness of space. They launched themselves into the void, propelled by their suits' thrusters. Debris floated past, jagged shards of metal glinting in the starlight. Johnny dodged a spinning fragment, his heart pounding in his ears. The stricken freighter loomed ahead, its hull pockmarked with scars. They landed hard, mag boots clanging against the hull. Johnny led the way, cutting through the airlock with a plasma torch. The ship's interior was dark, emergency lights flickering. The air smelled of ozone and fear. They raced through the corridors, following the schematics on their HUDs. The jammer's control room was deep in the ship's belly, a nest of wires and humming machinery. Johnny's blood ran cold as they entered. The control panels were shattered, sparks cascading from torn conduits. Sabotage. He cursed under his breath. His fingers flew over the keys, rerouting power, bypassing fried circuits. Sweat beaded on his forehead as he worked, the ship shuddering under the Zenloth's assault. Johnny gritted his teeth, focusing on the task at hand. Wires sparked as he spliced them together, his movements precise, calculated. Through the viewports, he caught glimpses of the battle raging outside. Relax's ship danced through a storm of plasma bolts, its hull glowing with the heat of re-entry. The other freighters formed a defensive wall, their cannons blazing. Zix's voice cut through the chaos, cool and collected. Freighters in position. Concentrate fire on the lead Zenloth ship. The Zenloth closed in, their weapons primed for the killing blow. Johnny's heart raced, his fingers a blur over the controls. Just a few more seconds. With a final, desperate keystroke, the jammer hummed to life. The freighter vanished from the Zenloth's sensors, cloaked in silence. The Zenloth ships hesitated, their formation breaking. Relax seized the moment, an ion blast leaping from her ship's cannons. It struck the lead Zenloth vessel, engulfing it in a cascade of blue lightning. The freighters opened fire, a volley of missiles and plasma ripping into the second Zenloth ship. It listed, trailing smoke and debris. The third ship, outmatched and outflanked, turned tail and fled, vanishing into the swirling vortex of hyperspace. Cheers erupted over the comms, the Bajoran crew's relief palpable. Johnny allowed himself a moment of satisfaction, a grim smile tugging at his lips. But the job wasn't over yet. They still had a long way to go, and the Andrazi sector held many dangers. Johnny straightened, squaring his shoulders. Whatever challenges lay ahead, he and his team would face them head-on. For now, though, they could breathe. The convoy regrouped, the freighters falling into formation behind the stealth ship. Johnny and Grom made their way back to the airlock, the weight of the mission heavy on their shoulders. As they crossed the threshold, Relax's voice crackled over the comms once more. "Nice work, boys. Knew you had it in you." Johnny just shook his head, a wry chuckle escaping his lips. Never doubted it for a second. Johnny's eyes narrowed as he listened to the desperate plea. Keed's voice crackled over the line. "Johnny, you have to help them. I'm ordering you to divert to Taylor 4 and reinforce the colony." A muscle twitched in Johnny's jaw. Leaving the convoy exposed went against every instinct he had. But the urgency in Kaid's voice and the cries of the besieged colonists left no room for debate. "Understood. We're on our way." The team huddled around the holotable, a plan taking shape. Relax would drop Johnny, Grom, and a squad of Bajoran volunteers on Talawe 4 to bolster the colony's defenses. Zix and the remaining crew would see the convoy safely to its destination. As the stealth ship pierced Talar 4's atmosphere, anti-aircraft fire streaked across the sky. Relax's hands flew over the controls, the ship dancing between the deadly beams. Sweat beaded on Johnny's forehead as they hurtled toward the surface, the colony's smoke-shrouded walls coming into view. The ship touched down, the ramp lowering with a hiss. Johnny, Grom and the Bajoran squad pounded down the ramp, weapons primed. Chaos engulfed them, the air thick with the stench of smoke and blood. Zenloth soldiers swarmed the colony's perimeter, their weapons spitting fire. Johnny charged into the melee, his rifle barking. A Zenloth soldier fell, his chest a smoking ruin. Beside him, Grom roared, his massive fists pulverizing armor and bone. The Bajorans rallied around them, their weapons adding to the crescendo of violence. Johnny's mind raced, assessing the battlefield with a soldier's eye. Grom, take a squad and secure the western wall. I'll lead the push to the north. Grom grunted his acknowledgement, already moving. The battle raged, Johnny orchestrating the defense with ruthless efficiency. Grom was a one-man army, Zenloth soldiers falling before him like wheat before a scythe. The Bajorans fought with renewed ferocity, inspired by the humans' leadership and the Chronoans' raw power. Inch by blood-soaked inch, they pushed the Zenloth back. The tide was turning, victory was within their grasp. Then the sky split open, a Zenloth dropship descending like a monstrous bird of prey. Its ramp lowered, disgorging a fresh wave of soldiers, and at their head, a towering figure clad in armor of midnight black, a crackling plasma hammer clutched in his fists. Krazax the Unbreakable had come to Taylor 4. The Zenloth champion bellowed a challenge, his voice like the rumble of an avalanche. He charged, his hammer smashing Bajoran soldiers aside like ragdolls, straight toward Johnny. Johnny raised his rifle, the air shimmering with the heat of his defiance. Krazax was almost upon him, the plasma hammer a howling blur of destruction. This was the moment that would decide the fate of the colony, of the Bajorans, of the war itself. The hammer fell. The plasma hammer howled, smashing into Johnny's rifle. The gun crumpled like an empty soda can, sparks cascading from the shattered power cell. Johnny skidded back, pain lancing up his arm from the impact. Krazax advanced, the hammer whirling in a blur of crackling energy. Grom's motionless body lay crumpled against a shattered wall, smoke rising from a gaping hole in his chest. Johnny's eyes narrowed, rage and grief warring within him. He tossed aside the ruined rifle and drew his sidearm, the plasma pistol whining as it charged. Krazax laughed, the sound like grinding metal. "Pathetic human, your weapons are useless against me." Johnny didn't bother with a retort. He fired, the plasma bolt splashing harmlessly against Krazax's armor. The champion charged, hammer raised for a killing blow. Johnny rolled, the hammer smashing into the ground where he'd been a heartbeat before. He came up firing, aiming for Krazax's helmet visor. The bolts ricocheted, leaving scorch marks on the gleaming surface. Around them the battle raged. The Bajorans fought with desperate courage, but the Zenloth forces were relentless. Inch by bloody inch the defenders were driven back, their lines buckling under the onslaught. A flicker of movement caught Johnny's eye. One of the Bajoran soldiers, clutching a bleeding wound in his side, was crawling toward a discarded Zenloth rifle. Johnny's mind raced, a desperate plan taking shape. He fired his pistol wildly, the bolts peppering Krazax's armor. The champion snarled, swinging the hammer in a wide arc. Johnny ducked, the hammer passing over his head with a sizzling hiss. He sprinted toward the fallen Bajoran, scooping up the rifle as he passed. Krazax gave chase, his heavy footfalls shaking the ground. Johnny spun, dropping to one knee. He fired the rifle, the beam lancing out toward Krazax's neck joint. The champion twisted, the beam grazing his armor. A shower of sparks erupted from the impact point, and Krazax stumbled, off balance. It was the opening Johnny needed. He charged, leaping onto Krazax's back. His fingers scrabbled for purchase on the smooth armor, finding the gap at the neck joint. He drew his combat knife, the blade glinting in the smoke-shrouded light. Krazax roared, thrashing like a wild beast. Johnny clung on, driving the knife into the gap with all his strength. The blade sank into flesh and circuitry, sparks cascading from the wound. Krazax screamed, a sound of pure agony and rage. Johnny twisted the knife, wincing as electricity arced up his arm. Warning lights flashed inside Krazax's helmet, the champion's systems failing one by one. With a final, shuddering gasp, Krazax toppled forward, crashing to the ground in a heap of lifeless metal. Johnny rolled clear, his breath coming in ragged gasps. He staggered to his feet, turning to face the Zenloth forces. They faltered, their advance grinding to a halt as they stared in disbelief at their fallen champion. Johnny raised his fist, the knife still clutched in his bloody grip. "For Bajor!" he roared, his voice hoarse with pain and exhaustion. The Bajorans took up the cry, surging forward with renewed strength. They crashed into the Zenloth lines, blasters blazing and blades flashing. The invaders reeled, their formations shattering under the ferocious counterattack. Johnny led the charge, his knife and stolen rifle dealing death with every step. Beside him, the Bajorans fought with the fury of a people pushed to the brink, determined to reclaim their home. The Zenloth fell back, retreating toward their dropships in disarray. Johnny and the Bajorans pressed the attack, driving them back step by step, body by body. The air rang with the sounds of battle, the clash of weapons, and the cries of the wounded and dying. At last, the final Zenloth soldier was driven from the colony, fleeing into the waiting dropships. The vessels lifted off, their engines roaring as they clawed for the safety of space. Johnny sagged against a shattered wall, his strength spent. Around him the Bajorans cheered, their voices rising in a ragged chorus of triumph and relief. The news of their victory spread like wildfire, reaching the convoy and Bajor Prime in a matter of hours. Cade, watching the reports with wide eyes, could hardly believe what he was seeing. A human, leading Bajoran soldiers to victory against a Zenloth champion. It was unthinkable, impossible. And yet, there was Johnny, bloodied but unbowed, standing tall among the cheering Bajorans. Cade's mind raced, the implications of Johnny's feat sinking in. If a human could achieve such a thing, what else might they be capable of? He reached for his communicator, keying in the code for the Bajoran High Council. It was time for a change, a new era in Bajoran human relations, and Johnny Brown, the savage from Earth, would be the catalyst for that change. With the colony secured and Grom stable after emergency surgery, Johnny and the Bajoran squad returned to the stealth ship. Raylax had the engines primed, and they lifted off, leaving the battle-scarred moon behind. They rejoined the convoy, which had reached its destination unscathed under Zix's watchful eye. As the crew unloaded the precious crystals, a sleek Bajoran shuttle descended from the sky, its hull emblazoned with the crest of the High Council. The ramp lowered, revealing Cade and an imposing figure in ornate robes, Torrin Zal, one of the most influential members of the council. Johnny squared his shoulders, expecting a cold reception from the man who had so vehemently opposed human involvement. To his surprise, Zal strode forward and clasped Johnny's hand in a firm grip. "Johnny Brown," he said, his voice rich with newfound respect. "The Bajoran people owe you a great debt." Cade stepped forward, a smile tugging at his lips. "Your exploits have captured the hearts and minds of our people. The tide of public opinion has turned, and the council has taken notice." Zal nodded. "We have come to extend an official invitation. The High Council wishes to meet with you on Bajor Prime to discuss the possibility of a formal alliance between our worlds." Johnny hesitated, the weight of the moment settling on his shoulders. He was a soldier, not a diplomat, but he knew this was a chance to forge a bond that could turn the tide of the war. "I accept," he said, his voice steady. He bid farewell to his team, each of them clasping his hand or pulling him into a rough embrace. Then, with a deep breath, he boarded Zal's shuttle and watched as the convoy shrank into the distance. The journey to Bajor Prime passed in a blur of hyperspace. When they finally emerged from the jump, Johnny gasped at the sight that greeted him. The planet hung in space like a jewel, its oceans sparkling and its continents lush with greenery. But it was the reception that truly took his breath away. As the shuttle descended through the atmosphere, Johnny saw crowds thronging the streets of the capital city, their faces upturned and their voices raised in cheers. Banners bearing his name fluttered in the breeze, and children waved miniature Bajoran and Earth flags. Zal smiled at Johnny's astonishment. You are a symbol of hope to them, he explained, a reminder that even in our darkest hour, heroes can rise from the most unexpected places. As they landed at the High Council Pavilion, an honor guard flanked the ramp, their armor gleaming in the sun. Johnny descended the ramp to a sea of cheering faces, feeling a swell of emotion rising in his chest. The crowds parted as he made his way into the council chambers, a cavernous room with soaring ceilings and intricate mosaics. The assembled councillors rose as one, their faces etched with a mix of awe and respect. Zal took the floor, his voice ringing out clear and strong. Esteemed councillors, I come before you today to bear witness to the deeds of Johnny Brown, a human who has risked his life time and again in defense of the Bajoran people. He recounted Johnny's exploits, the daring rescue of the convoy, the brutal battle on Talar 4, the defeat of Krazax the Unbreakable. With each word, the councillors' eyes widened, and murmurs of astonishment rippled through the chamber. In light of these extraordinary acts of valor, Zal continued, I move that we immediately dispatch a diplomatic envoy to Earth to forge a formal alliance between our worlds. The chamber erupted into debate, voices rising and falling like the tide. Some councillors remained hesitant, their distrust of humans deeply ingrained, but Kaid and Zal argued passionately, their words buoyed by the groundswell of public support. In the end, the vote was close, but the majority carried the day. The council would send an envoy to Earth with Johnny as their guide and representative. A cheer went up from the galleries, and Johnny felt a rush of emotion as he realized the magnitude of what had just transpired. A new chapter was beginning, one that could change the course of the war and the fate of the galaxy itself. And Johnny, the battle-scarred soldier from Earth, would be at the center of it all, a living bridge between two worlds that had once seemed so far apart. The High Council chambers buzzed with frantic activity as Johnny and the Bajoran envoy prepared for their departure to Earth. Torin Zal, his face grave, pulled Johnny aside. We have dire news, he said, his voice strained. A massive Zenloth fleet has been detected at the edges of our space. They're poised for a full-scale invasion. Johnny's heart sank. He glanced at the envoy, their faces mirroring his own concern. How long do we have? He asked. Hours at most, Zal replied. We need your help, Johnny. The High Council is in chaos. We have no plan, no strategy to repel an invasion of this scale. Johnny closed his eyes, his mind racing. The diplomatic mission to Earth was crucial, a chance to forge a lasting alliance that could turn the tide of the war. But he couldn't abandon the Bajorans, not after all they had been through together. Zal sagged with relief. Thank you, Johnny, we are in your debt. Johnny turned to the envoy. Get to Earth, he urged. Explain the situation. We need their help now more than ever. As the envoy boarded their ship, Johnny pulled out his communicator. Zix Relax Grom, he said, his voice tense. I need you on Bajor Prime ASAP. We've got a fight coming. Within hours, Johnny's team had assembled in the High Council's war room. Grom, his wounds still fresh, stood tall and proud, ready for battle. Zix and Relax pored over star charts and sensor data, their faces grim. Johnny conferred with the Bajoran military leadership, a plan taking shape. We can't meet the Zenloth head-on, he said. We need to be smart, use their own tactics against them. He gestured to the star chart, pointing out a dense asteroid field near the system's edge. We lure them in here, he explained. Mine the asteroids, set up cloaked gun platforms, then we hit them hard and fast before they realize what's happening. The Bajoran generals nodded, their eyes glinting with newfound hope. A bold plan, one said, but it might just work. As the Bajoran fleet moved into position, Johnny and his team prepared for their role in the coming battle. They would lead a small force of elite pilots, engaging the Zenloth vanguard and drawing them into the trap. Relax ran her hands over her ship's controls, a fierce grin on her face. Just like old times, eh, Johnny? Zix, hunched over his console, chuckled. Let's hope this ends better than some of our previous jobs. Even Grom, usually stoic, allowed himself a small smile. A good fight, he rumbled, a worthy cause. As the first Zenloth ships entered the system, Johnny felt a surge of adrenaline. This was it, the moment of truth. He gripped the controls, his eyes narrowed. "All right, team," he said, his voice steady. "Let's show these bastards what we're made of." They shot forward, their ships darting and weaving through the asteroid field. The Zenloth vanguard, caught off guard, gave chase, their weapons blazing. Johnny juked and spun, Raylax matching his every move. They danced through the tumbling rocks, the Zenloth ship struggling to keep up. Zix's fingers flew over his console, jamming the enemy's sensors, sowing confusion in their ranks. As they reached the heart of the field, the mines and gun platforms came to life. Explosions lit the void, Zenloth ships vanishing in balls of fire. The vanguard, realizing the trap, tried to pull back, but it was too late. Johnny and his team pressed the attack, picking off stragglers, harrying the Zenloth forces. The Bajoran fleet, lying in wait, surged forward, catching the invaders in a devastating crossfire. For a moment it seemed like victory was at hand, but as the battle wore on, the sheer number of Zenloth ships began to tell. For every ship destroyed, 2 more took its place. The Bajoran defenses, stretched to the limit, started to buckle. Zix, his face bathed in the glow of his console, shouted a warning. "Johnny, we can't hold them. There's too many." Johnny gritted his teeth, his ship shuddering under a barrage of plasma fire. The Zenloth fleet, sensing weakness, pressed their attack, driving towards Bajor Prime. It seemed like only a matter of time before the planet's defenses were overwhelmed. But just as all hope seemed lost, a new wave of sensor contacts lit up the edge of the system. Johnny's heart leapt as he recognized the signatures. The Earth fleet had arrived, responding to his call for aid. Massive warships, bristling with weapons, dropped out of hyperspace, their engines flaring. Fighters swarmed from their hangar bays, streaking towards the Zenloth fleet. The comm channels crackled with chatter as the Earth forces coordinated with the Bajoran defenders. Johnny felt a surge of relief, mixed with fierce pride. He had done it. Against all odds, he had brought the humans and Bajorans together, forging an alliance that could stand against the darkness. The tide of battle turned as the combined human and Bajoran fleets tore into the Zenloth invasion force. The invaders, caught between 2 fronts, began to crumble. Ships exploded, debris spinning through the void. Johnny and his team fought with renewed vigor, their ships darting through the chaos, picking off targets with precision and skill. Raylax whooped with joy as she sent a Zenloth cruiser tumbling, its hull shattered by a well-placed torpedo. Zix, his face lit with a fierce grin, jammed the enemy's comms, sowing disorder and confusion. Even Grom, his ship battered but unbroken, plowed through the Zenloth lines, his weapons never falling silent. As the last Zenloth ship fled, limping towards the safety of hyperspace, a cheer went up across the human and Bajoran fleets. Johnny sagged back in his chair, exhaustion and elation warring within him. They had done it. The invasion was repelled. Bajor Prime was safe. And more than that, a new chapter had begun. Humans and Bajorans, once distrustful and divided, now stood united against the darkness. There was still much to be done, Johnny knew. The war was far from over, and the challenges ahead would be greater than ever. But as he looked out at the battered but victorious ships around him, he felt a swell of hope. As the Earth fleet surged into the battle, the balance of power shifted in an instant. The Zenloth ships, caught off guard by the sudden reinforcements, scrambled to regroup, their formation fracturing under the onslaught of human firepower. On the bridge of the Earth flagship, Admiral Jenna Sheridan stood tall, her gaze locked on the tactical display. She barked orders with precision and authority, directing the combined human and Bajoran forces like a conductor guiding a symphony of destruction. "Target the Zenloth command ships," she commanded, her voice cutting through the chaos of the bridge. "Hit them hard and fast. Don't give them a chance to recover." The Earth vessels surged forward, their advanced weapons slicing through the Zenloth shields like a hot knife through butter. Missiles streaked across the void, slamming into the enemy ships with devastating force. The Zenloth return fire was fierce, but the human ships' superior technology and shielding held fast. In the midst of the maelstrom, Johnny and his team fought with renewed vigor, their spirits lifted by the arrival of their human allies. They darted through the Zenloth lines, striking at weak points and drawing fire away from the main battle. Raylax's stealth ship danced through the chaos, its cloaking device shimmering as it slipped behind enemy lines. Zix's fingers flew over the console, jamming Zenloth sensors and communications, sowing confusion in their ranks. But even as the tide turned in their favor, Johnny's keen eye spotted a group of Zenloth ships breaking away from the main fleet, attempting to slip away and regroup. He knew he couldn't let them escape, couldn't risk them returning with reinforcements. "Admiral Sheridan," he called over the comm, his voice tight with urgency, "I've got a group of runners trying to make a break for it. Permission to pursue?" There was a moment of silence, then Sheridan's voice crackled back. "Permission granted, Johnny. Take your team and bring them down. We'll hold the line here." Johnny felt a surge of adrenaline as he called out to his squad, "You heard the Admiral. Let's go hunting." They peeled away from the main battle, Raylax's stealth ship leading the charge. They plunged into the asteroid field, weaving through the tumbling rocks as they chased down the fleeing Zenloth. It was a high-stakes game of cat and mouse, with both sides using the asteroids for cover, trading potshots as they maneuvered for position. The Zenloth ships were fast and maneuverable, but Johnny's team had the advantage of the stealth ship's cloaking device. Raylax guided the ship with expert precision, slipping through narrow gaps and skimming dangerously close to the jagged rocks. Zix worked his magic, feeding false sensor readings to the Zenloth, leading them into dead ends and ambushes. As they closed in on the fleeing ships, Johnny had a sudden inspiration. "Raylax," he called out, "can you get us ahead of them? I've got an idea." The stealth ship surged forward, its engines straining as it pushed to overtake the Zenloth. As they passed the fleeing ships, Johnny and Raylax worked in tandem, deploying a minefield directly in their path. The Zenloth, their sensors still scrambled by Zix's electronic warfare, flew straight into the trap. Explosions bloomed in the void, the mines tearing through their hulls and sending them spinning off course. Johnny and his team pounced, picking off the crippled ships one by one. Their weapons flashed and flared, the asteroids lit by the strobing light of plasma fire and detonations. But as the last of the smaller ships fell, a new threat emerged from the depths of the asteroid field. The Zenloth flagship, a massive dreadnought bristling with enough firepower to level a small moon, bore down on them like a predator closing in for the kill. Johnny felt a chill run down his spine as he saw the behemoth loom into view. Its shield shimmered with an almost palpable aura of menace, its hull pitted and scarred from countless battles. "Evasive maneuvers," he shouted, as the first salvo from the dreadnought's cannons ripped through space towards them. Raylax wrenched the controls, sending the stealth ship into a dizzying spiral. The Bajoran ship scattered, trying to flank the dreadnought and find a chink in its armor. But the Zenloth flagship was a formidable foe, its weapons hammering the Bajoran ships with relentless fury. One by one, Johnny's allies fell, their hulls breached, and their crews consigned to the cold embrace of the void. In the stealth ship, Grom struggled to his feet, his face contorted in a grimace of pain. He had taken a bad hit during the ground battle on Talar 4, and his wounds were still fresh. But as he saw the flagship bearing down on them, he knew what he had to do. With a grunt of effort, he hauled himself into the gunner's seat, his massive hands gripping the controls. "Johnny!" he called out, his voice rough with pain and determination. "Get me a clear shot at that thing's reactor." Johnny felt a surge of emotion, a mix of pride and fear for his friend. He knew what Grom was planning, knew the sacrifice he was willing to make. With a nod, he called out to Raylax, "You heard the man. Let's give him what he needs." Raylax gritted her teeth, pouring every ounce of skill and instinct into her piloting. She jinked and juked, bobbing and weaving through the asteroid field, drawing the dreadnought's fire. The flagship's cannons hammered at their shields, the impact sending shudders through the stealth ship's frame. Alarms blared and warning lights flashed, but Raylax held the course, her focus absolute. And then for a split second they had it. a clear line of fire straight to the dreadnought's pulsing reactor core. Grom didn't hesitate. With a roar of defiance and fury, he unleashed a torrent of plasma, the guns glowing white-hot with the intensity of the barrage. The shots pierced the flagship's shields, slamming into the reactor with the force of a small sun. For a moment, time seemed to stand still, the battlefield holding its breath. Then the dreadnought exploded. A blinding flash of light, a silent scream of energy, and the mighty vessel came apart, torn to shreds by the force of its own reactor going critical. The shockwave slammed into the stealth ship, sending it tumbling end over end. Johnny felt the world spin around him, felt the bite of his harness digging into his chest. And then silence. The guns had fallen still. The explosions faded to distant echoes. In the sudden calm, Johnny could hear his own heartbeat, could feel the weight of what had just happened settling onto his shoulders. Grom was gone, sacrificed in a moment of pure, selfless heroism. The Zenloth flagship was destroyed, its threat to Bajor and the Allied forces eliminated. But the battle was far from over. Out there in the void, the war still raged. Earth and Bajor, united at last, still had a long fight ahead of them. Johnny closed his eyes, drawing in a deep, shuddering breath. Then, with a voice hoarse from shouting, he called out to his remaining team. "Come on," he said, "we've got work to do." With the Zenloth flagship torn apart, the remnants of the invading fleet broke and ran, scattering into the void. The battered but victorious Allied ships limped back into formation, triaging the wounded and taking stock of the fallen. Johnny stared numbly at the expanding cloud of debris that had been the stealth ship. Grom was gone. He knew it in his bones, but he had to be sure. He had to see for himself. "Relax, take us in," he said, his voice hollow. "We need to search for survivors." The Quarian pilot nodded grimly, guiding the ship into the wreckage field. They picked their way through the twisted metal and frozen corpses, scanning for any sign of life. But there was nothing. Just the cold confirmation of what Johnny already knew. He slumped back in his seat, grief and exhaustion washing over him. Grom had given his life to save them all, to save Bajor. Johnny's fists clenched, his nails biting into his palms. He would make sure that sacrifice was not in vain. As they returned to the fleet, Admiral Sheridan hailed them. "Johnny, the High Council has requested your presence. They wish to discuss the future of our alliance." Johnny took a deep breath, straightening his uniform. The future. It seemed like a foreign concept after the hell they had just been through, but he owed it to Grom, to all those who had fallen, to see this through. He met Admiral Sheridan and the High Council aboard the Bajoran flagship. The mood was somber, the weight of the battle still heavy in the air, but there was also a sense of purpose, of resolve. Torin Zal stepped forward, his face lined with grief and gratitude. "Johnny Brown," he said, his voice rough with emotion, "Bajor owes you and your people a debt we can never repay. You have shown us the true strength of humanity, a strength we once foolishly dismissed." He extended his hand, a gesture of respect and partnership. "We wish to formalize our alliance with Earth, to stand together against any threat that may come. Will you stand with us?" Johnny clasped Zal's hand, feeling the weight of the moment settle on his shoulders. "Earth will stand with Bajor," he said, his voice firm. "We will face the future together." The details were hammered out, the treaty signed. A new era had begun, one of cooperation and mutual support. The road ahead would not be easy, Johnny knew. There would be challenges, enemies both old and new, but they would face them together, humans and Bajorans, united as never before. The ceremony was a somber affair, a tribute to those who had fallen. Johnny and his surviving team members stood before the assembled dignitaries, their uniforms heavy with medals. They accepted the honors with quiet dignity, the scars of battle etched on their faces and hearts. As the ceremony drew to a close, Admiral Sheridan approached Johnny. "We have one more honor to bestow," she said, her eyes shining with pride and sorrow. "The position of Earth's ambassador to Bajor. The Council has unanimously nominated you, Johnny. Will you accept?" Johnny swallowed hard, emotion threatening to overwhelm him. Ambassador. It was a heavy mantle, a responsibility he had never sought, but he knew he could not refuse. Not after all they had been through, not with the memory of Grom's sacrifice still so raw. "I accept," he said, his voice rough. "I will do my best to honor the trust placed in me and to further the bond between our peoples." As the gathered crowd began to disperse, Johnny found himself alone with his thoughts. He stared out at the sea of faces, humans and Bajorans alike, united in their grief and their hope. He thought of Grom, of the void his loss had left in their lives. He thought of the countless others who had fallen, the lives given in defense of their worlds. The peace they had won was a fragile thing, bought with blood and sacrifice. But it was a start, a foundation upon which to build a better future. And as Johnny stood there, the weight of his new role settling upon him, he felt a flicker of pride amid the sorrow. Pride in his team, in the unbreakable bonds they had forged through fire and adversity. Pride in the alliance they had helped to build, a bridge between two worlds that had once seemed so far apart. And pride in the knowledge that, when the call had come, when the fate of worlds hung in the balance, humanity had answered. They had stood tall, shoulder to shoulder with the Bajorans, and shown the galaxy the true measure of their strength. The Bajorans had once looked upon humans as savages, as lesser beings unworthy of respect. But now they knew the truth. They had seen the tenacity, the adaptability, the sheer stubborn refusal to yield that defined the human spirit. And in Johnny Brown they saw the embodiment of those qualities. A man who had started as a mere mercenary, a hired gun, but who had become so much more. A leader, a warrior, a friend, a symbol of the bond between their peoples, a bond forged in the crucible of war and tempered by the sacrifices of heroes. The road ahead would be long, Johnny knew that. There would be other threats to face, other battles to fight. You have reached the end of the story. If you enjoyed this story and want to support us, please leave a like and subscribe to our channel, and for every comment that says 88, I will heart every single one of them. Thank you for your time.